Hey everyone, welcome back to another explainer from Forge College. So in our last session covering core runtime components and validator roles, we talked a lot about how nodes operate and how transactions actually propagate. But propagating a transaction across the network, that's really just shouting into a very crowded, noisy room. How does the network actually know you aren't just making things up? How do we make that leap from simply passing a message around to definitively proving a legitimate transfer value? Well, let's dive right in, because this is where the absolute magic of decentralized trust happens. We're going to break down the exact principles of transaction validation. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting border control, checking out documents and UTXO registries, running through the biometric test of signatures, navigating node customs, catching some double spenders, and finally passing through the consensus gate. Let's get moving. Part 1. Welcome to border control. To really wrap your head around transaction validation, you need the right mental model. I want you to think of a Bitcoin node as the strictest, most uncompromising international border control checkpoint on Earth. Every single transaction that gets broadcast to the network is basically an incoming traveler asking to enter. And the node, it doesn't just wave them through because they look friendly or because they came from a peer it recognizes. No way. It conducts a rigorous, deterministic inspection across 5 distinct desks: a syntactic check, a UTXO check, signature verification, policy enforcement, and finally, consensus constraints. Fail at literally any single one of these desks and boom, they are immediately rejected. There are no appeals, you can't ask to speak to a manager. This layered approach is actually brilliant because it systematically filters out spam, weird errors, and malicious attackers as early as possible, which saves the node a ton of processing power. Section 2. Documents and UTXO registries. All right, so our traveler has just walked up to the very first desks at the checkpoint. This is where the node checks if their paperwork is formatted correctly and, honestly, if their identity is even valid for travel today. Notice how ruthlessly efficient these first 2 desks are. At desk 1, the syntactic check, the border officer essentially looks at the passport and asks, hey, are there missing pages? Is the math sensible? Is this written in crayon? Are there negative outputs? If the transaction data is just malformed gibberish, it is tossed instantly. The node outright refuses to waste its CPU on it. But if it passes, the traveler hits desk 2, UTXO availability. Here, the officer checks the official registry to see if this traveler's identity has already been used today. In network terms, the node is checking if the inputs reference outputs that haven't been spent yet. If the funds are already spent, see ya, they're shown the door. So what the node is actually verifying at desk 2 is the UTXO, the unspent transaction output. Basically, this is a piece of Bitcoin that has been authorized to an owner but hasn't been spent yet. Nodes maintain this highly optimized, ridiculously fast database of these UTXOs so they can instantly verify if the funds are actually available. It's what enforces the most unbreakable rule of money: you simply cannot spend the exact same coin twice. Moving right along to Section 3, signatures, the biometric test. Okay, so our traveler had the right paperwork and the funds are available. Awesome. But are they who they say they are? This brings us to the third desk, the crucial biometric scanner, where identity is mathematically proven. This right here is the ultimate authenticity test. Proof of keys equals proof of the right to spend. The transaction absolutely must contain cryptographic signatures proving the spender actually holds the private key for those specific funds. It ties the right to spend directly to the possession of that key. Without it, the process stops completely. If an attacker tries to spend your UTXO, this is the exact moment they get tackled by network security. The signature fails, the transaction is trashed, and their little theft attempt is totally neutralized. Next up, Section 4, Node Customs and Policies. Now we arrive at the 4th desk, Customs, and this is where things get, well, slightly subjective. As you keep exploring the learning materials over at Forge College, you're going to notice that not every node behaves identically. At this desk, individual node preferences actually take over, rather than strict, unbendable network laws. It's super important to distinguish between a node's local policy choices and the network's hard consensus rules. Policy rules, they vary by node. They filter out spam, they enforce dust limits so microscopic outputs don't clog up memory, and they set minimum fee thresholds. Think of it like a customs officer saying, look, you're legally allowed to enter, but you aren't carrying enough to pay our local processing fee, so turn around. Consensus rules, on the other hand, are the immutable laws of the network, things like block weight limits and the rules for permanent ledger acceptance. So you can pass the consensus laws perfectly, but still get rejected by a local node's custom policy. Section 5. Catching the double spenders. We've seen the normal flow, right? But what about the bad actors? Let's shift our focus to how this checkpoint pipeline handles people who are actively trying to cheat the system. Imagine this scenario. What happens when two travelers show up at the exact same time holding the exact same passport? In network terms, an attacker broadcasts a transaction and then immediately broadcasts a conflicting one, trying to spend the exact same UTXO twice. Red lights start flashing at the mempool check or the UTXO availability desk because the node instantly spots the identical inputs. So, what does it do with that second traveler? Well, this brings us to a pretty fascinating policy tool called Replace by Fee, or RBF. Remember those local customs rules we just talked about? Some nodes actually use RBF as a local policy. What it basically means is, if that second traveler, the conflicting transaction, shows up, signals that they are replaceable, and flashes a significantly higher tip for the customs fee, the node might actually kick the first traveler out of line and let the VIP take their place. But if they don't pay up, or if the node simply doesn't allow RBF policies at all, that second traveler is just tossed out as a blatant double spend attempt. To pull all of this together, conflicts are caught at different stages for very different reasons across this whole inspection pipeline. Syntactic scans, they catch garbage data and parsing failures. UTXO checks, they catch spent or missing funds. The signature stage catches invalid math and would-be thieves. And finally, local policy flags conflicting inputs and decides the winner between competing valid spends. Seriously, if you're taking notes on this module, this matrix is the ultimate cheat sheet for exactly how and where nodes spot trouble. Finally, Section 6, the final consensus gate. So our traveler has survived the paperwork, the UTXO check, the biometric scanner, and the customs fee policies. Now we guide them to the very last stage of the journey, being stamped into the official registry. This is where eventual acceptance actually happens. A miner pulls the transaction from the mempool and stamps it into a block. But here's the kicker. Even the border chiefs get audited. When that block is broadcast, every single peer on the network ruthlessly revalidates it against those strict consensus rules. If a corrupt miner tries to slip in a fake passport, a transaction that breaks the rules, the honest nodes will reject the entire block, and that miner loses the reward. If it's valid, the traveler is officially in. The transaction leaves the mempools, and those outputs safely become the fresh new UTXOs for tomorrow's travelers. Which brings us to the end of our border control journey. But it does leave us with a critical, slightly uncomfortable question. If every single transaction is publicly validated, thoroughly checked at all these strict desks, and then permanently stamped into a public ledger, what on earth happens to your privacy if you reuse the exact same address over and over? We're going to be answering that provocative question in our next explainer on addresses, privacy, and double spending considerations. If you want to continue your learning journey and dive deeper into this subject and other Web3 topics, I highly encourage you to visit forge.college. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.